I'm Haley, 34, and I've always been the black sheep of my prestigious Boston family. For years, I've worn the label family embarrassment like an unwanted second skin. At my sister Madison's lavish engagement party last month, I overheard her use those exact words to her future mother-in-law while laughing loud enough for nearby guests to hear. I just smiled and said nothing too accustomed to the sting. But everything changed when her fiancé's father walked in and recognized me from across the room. Before I dive into what happened next, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button if you've ever felt like the odd one out in your family, and leave a comment sharing your experience. Now let's get into how one unexpected ally changed everything. Growing up as a Campbell in Boston's prestigious Beacon Hill neighborhood meant living with certain expectations. Our family name carried weight in social circles, something my parents, Richard and Eleanor, never let us forget. Our 4-story brownstone housed generations of Campbell success stories. Doctors, lawyers, business magnates, their portraits lining the mahogany-panelled hallway like silent judges of each new generation. My sister Madison, younger than me by 3 years, embodied everything the Campbell name represented. With her perfectly highlighted blonde hair, Yale law degree, and impeccable social graces, she was the golden child who never stepped a toe out of line. By 31, she had become the youngest partner at her law firm and secured an engagement to William Hartford III, heir to a publishing empire. I, on the other hand, was the disappointment. Haley Darling, the Preston's daughter, just made junior partner at Goldman Sachs. My mother would say during our monthly family dinners, the comparison hanging in the air like a blade. Wouldn't you like me to put in a word with Jeffrey Sullivan? His investment firm is always looking for bright young things. These suggestions always came, despite knowing I'd abandoned a business degree at Boston University 8 years ago to pursue photography. My camera bag replaced the designer purses my mother gifted me. Each birthday collected dust in my closet. A hobby is one thing, Haley, my father had said the day I told them I was dropping out. His voice remained level, but his knuckles whitened around his whiskey glass. But the Campbell name means something in this city. We've built a legacy that you're choosing to abandon for pictures. That night marked the beginning of the distance between us, a chasm that widened with each passing year. Madison, ever the perfect daughter, picked up my slack by excelling in all the ways I wouldn't. She dated appropriate men from appropriate families, joined the right clubs, sat on the right charity boards, and never wore the same designer outfit twice. I moved into a modest apartment in Jamaica Plain, took odd jobs to support myself between photography gigs, and gradually built a portfolio documenting stories I believed mattered. By 30, I'd published photo essays on struggling fishing communities in Massachusetts, the hidden world of third-shift workers, and an intimate series following a terminal cancer patient's final months. My work received positive attention in photography circles, but never enough commercial success to impress my family. Each small achievement I shared at reluctant holiday gatherings was met with tight smiles and quick subject changes. "That's nice, dear," my mother would say before turning to Madison. "Now tell everyone about the Harrington case you're working on." The past year had been particularly challenging. 3 promising photography contracts fell through, due to budget cuts forcing me to pick up barista shifts at a local coffee shop to make rent. Each setback felt like confirmation of my family's perspective, that my chosen path was unreliable, impractical, ultimately doomed to fail. When the thick cream envelope containing Madison's engagement party invitation arrived, my first instinct was to decline. The thought of enduring an entire evening of subtle jabs about my career and life choices, all while celebrating Madison's perfect match with the perfect man from the perfect family, made my stomach churn. But some stubborn part of me, the part that still hoped for my parents' approval for recognition that my different path could still be valuable, made me RSVP yes. Perhaps it was also the part that couldn't bear the conversations that would follow if I didn't show. Such a shame Haley couldn't make it to her own sister's engagement celebration. But you know how she is. Unreliable. So I marked the date on my calendar and tried to prepare myself emotionally for what would inevitably be an exercise in humiliation. What I couldn't have known was that this party wouldn't unfold like all the Campbell gatherings before it, that for once being the family embarrassment would lead to something unexpected. The day of Madison's engagement party arrived with perfect early June weather, as if even the elements knew better than to disappoint the Campbell family. Golden sunshine bathed my parents' estate, as I pulled my aging Honda Civic into the circular driveway, already lined with luxury vehicles, whose combined worth probably exceeded what I'd earn in a decade. I'd spent almost 2 weeks' worth of barista tips on a navy blue cocktail dress that looked designer, but wasn't my one concession to the Campbell obsession with appearances. My naturally wavy brown hair was smoothed into a sleek chignon, and I'd applied makeup with more care than I had in months. Despite these efforts, I knew I'd be found lacking within moments of arrival. "Valet's around back for the catering staff," said a uniformed attendant as I stepped out of my car. "I'm family, actually," I replied, the familiar sting of being mistaken for someone who didn't belong here washing over me. His eyes widened slightly. "Miss Campbell, I apologize. I didn't recognize you." Why would he? I'd become a ghost in my own family home, appearing briefly for obligatory holidays and disappearing again. As I handed over my keys, I took a deep breath and made my way toward the imposing front entrance of the Georgian mansion where I'd grown up but never quite felt at home. The foyer buzzed with Boston's elite, judges, executives, old money and new, all orbiting my parents, who stood receiving guests with practiced charm. My mother spotted me first, her smile faltering for just a fraction of a second before social training took over. "Hayley, darling, you made it." Her ear kiss landed near my cheek, careful not to smudge her perfect makeup. "That dress is interesting, very bohemian." My father offered a stiff half hug. "You're looking well, sweetheart. Found any stable work yet? Not how are you, or I've missed you." Straight to the professional assessment, checking whether his wayward daughter had finally come to her senses. "My photography is going well, Dad. I just finished a series on urban food deserts that's being considered for—" "Richard the Whitmore's just arrived," my mother interrupted, touching my father's elbow. "Hayley, why don't you get yourself a drink? Madison is somewhere in the garden with William and his mother." Just like that, dismissed. I navigated through clusters of Boston's social elite, catching snippets of conversations about summer homes in the Vineyard private school admissions and stock portfolios. Helping myself to a glass of champagne from a passing server, I steeled myself for the inevitable encounter with the woman of the hour. I found Madison in the garden pavilion holding court among a circle of admirers. She looked stunning in a blush pink designer dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her 3-carat diamond engagement ring catching the light with every animated gesture. When she spotted me, she excused herself and glided over with practiced grace. "Hayley, you actually came." Her embrace was brief, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I wasn't sure you would, given how busy you must be with your projects." "I wouldn't miss my little sister's engagement party," I replied, trying to sound sincere despite the subtle dig. "Well, you simply must meet William's mother, Patricia. She's on the board of the Boston Arts Council. Perhaps she could help you find some proper work in photography, instead of those dreary documentaries you do." Before I could respond, she'd taken my elbow and steered me toward an elegant older woman in a Chanel suit. William stood beside her, tall and conventionally handsome, with his golden boy looks and confident posture. "Patricia, this is my sister Hayley," Madison announced, "the one I mentioned who does the photography." Patricia Hartford extended a manicured hand. "Lovely to meet you. Madison tells me you take pictures of homeless people. How charitable." "I document underrepresented communities and social issues," I corrected gently. "My last series focused on food insecurity in urban neighborhoods." "Fascinating," she replied with the tone of someone who found it anything but. "Have you ever considered portrait photography much more reliable clientele? We had the most marvelous photographer for our holiday cards last year." William offered a perfunctory handshake. "Nice to finally meet you. Madison's mentioned you." He paused, searching for something positive to say. "Have a unique perspective on things." I smiled tightly, recognizing the diplomatic rephrasing of whatever Madison had actually told him about her embarrassing older sister. The conversation limped along with painful small talk until I excused myself, retreating to a relatively quiet corner of the garden where I could observe rather than participate. From my vantage point, I watched Madison work the crowd like a seasoned politician, her laughter musical, her hand possessively linked through William's arm. My parents circulated separately, my father talking business, with the men, my mother evaluating the women's fashion choices with subtle glances and perfectly timed compliments. I was nursing my second glass of champagne when I overheard it, Madison's voice carrying from nearby just around a sculpted hedge where she stood with Patricia Hartford and 2 other women I recognized from her law firm. Why she insists on these depressing subjects. Homeless veterans, terminal cancer patients, poverty. It's like she deliberately chooses the most uncomfortable topics just to embarrass the family. Patricia's voice was lower but still audible. It must be difficult having a sister who's so unconventional. Madison's laugh cut through me like glass. That's a polite way of putting it. We just call her the family embarrassment. Dad had to remove her from the family business website because potential clients kept asking about her charity work, when it's really just her inability to get a real job. The women tittered and I felt my cheeks burn. I'd known how my family viewed me, of course, but hearing Madison say it so plainly to virtual strangers, taking such obvious pleasure in belittling me, hit differently than the usual disapproving glances and backhanded comments. I considered leaving right then, slipping away before anyone noticed, texting some excuse about not feeling well. But something kept me rooted in place. Perhaps pride or stubbornness, or simply not wanting to give Madison the satisfaction of running me off. Instead, I plastered on a neutral expression, finished my champagne, and prepared to endure a few more hours of subtle humiliation. Just another Campbell family gathering after all. But then a ripple of excitement moved through the crowd. Conversations paused, heads turned toward the entrance to the garden. William straightened his already perfect posture, and Madison rushed to his side, her face arranged in a practiced smile of welcome. Lawrence Hartford had arrived. William's father was legendary in publishing circles, a self-made mogul who had transformed a modest regional magazine into a global media empire. Unlike the old money that populated most of the party, Lawrence was known for his directness, his lack of patience for social pretense, and his intimidating business acumen. He cut an imposing figure as he made his entrance, tall and broad-shouldered despite being in his early 60s, with silver hair and piercing blue eyes that missed nothing. Patricia greeted him with a dutiful kiss on the cheek, while William shook his hand with the formality that suggested their relationship was more business than familial. As Madison began introducing him to my parents, Lawrence's gaze swept the gathering, and then stopped abruptly when it landed on me. I froze champagne glass halfway to my lips, because unlike everyone else at this party, Lawrence Hartford and I had met before. 3 years ago, when I had no idea my path would eventually cross with my sister's future in-laws, I had submitted a photo documentary series to his flagship publication. The project had consumed 18 months of my life. I had embedded with homeless veterans in Boston, gained their trust, documented their struggles with PTSD, addiction, unemployment, and a system that had failed them after their service. I had slept in shelters, attended support groups, visited VA hospitals, and captured moments of despair alongside flashes of dignity and resilience. When Hartford Media Group published the series, it had created a minor sensation. There had been an exhibition at a small gallery, interviews with local radio stations, even a journalism award that now sat on my apartment bookshelf, largely unknown to my family, who had never bothered to visit my home or show interest in my achievements. And now Lawrence Hartford was staring at me across his son's engagement party, recognition dawning in his eyes. My stomach dropped. Would he mention our connection? Would this uncomfortable worlds colliding moment create even more ammunition for Madison's mockery? Before I could decide whether to acknowledge him or try to blend into the background, Lawrence Hartford was making his way directly toward me, moving with purpose through the crowd of Boston's elite, many of whom tried unsuccessfully to capture his attention as he passed. "Haley Morgan," he said when he reached me, using the professional name I published under rather than Campbell. "I thought that was you. What an unexpected pleasure." All nearby conversations paused as heads turned in our direction. From the corner of my eye, I could see Madison's perfect smile falter confusion crossing her features. "Mr. Hartford," I replied, extending my hand. "It's good to see you again." "Okay." His handshake was firm, his expression genuinely pleased. "The last time we spoke was at the New England Press Photography Awards, wasn't it? Your series on homeless veterans remains one of the most impactful pieces we've published in the past decade." I could practically feel the shock rippling through the gathered Campbell social circle. My mother had frozen mid-conversation champagne glass, suspended in air. My father's bushy eyebrows had shot up toward his receding hairline. And Madison looked as though someone had just told her designer dress was a counterfeit. "Thank you," I said, finding my voice. "That project meant a lot to me." "It meant a lot to a lot of people," Lawrence replied. "The VA policy changes that followed were directly attributed to the awareness your work created." He glanced around at the opulent garden party, then back at me with newfound curiosity. "I had no idea you were connected to the Campbell family. You publish under Morgan." "It's my middle name," I explained, aware that every word we exchanged was being eagerly absorbed by dozens of eavesdroppers. I preferred to have my work judged on its own merits. Lawrence nodded approvingly. "Wise decision. though I'm surprised I haven't seen you at any of the preliminary events leading up to today. William mentioned his fiancée had a sister, but I don't recall him saying she was the photojournalist whose work I've been following for years. Before I could respond, Madison materialized at Lawrence's elbow, her expression a complex mixture of confusion and alarm. "I see you've met my sister," she said, looping her arm through his as if to steer him away. "Daddy's waiting to talk to you about the merger possibilities we discussed." Lawrence remained firmly in place. "Your sister and I are already acquainted, actually. Her photo essay series on homeless veterans was published by my flagship magazine 3 years ago. Won the Callaway Award for Photojournalism Excellence." He turned back to me. "I've been following your work since then. The recent series on food deserts was equally compelling." Madison's smile had become brittle. "How surprising. Haley never mentioned knowing you professionally." "Perhaps because no one ever asked about my work," I said quietly, years of dismissed achievements, giving the simple statement, "Wait." An uncomfortable silence fell over our little group, broken when William joined us, looking between his father and me with new interest. "You two know each other?" he asked. "Your future sister-in-law is one of the most talented documentary photographers working today," Lawrence said matter-of-factly. "Her homeless veterans series directly influenced Senator Markham's VA reform bill." William's eyebrows rose. "I had no idea." "Few people do, apparently," Lawrence remarked, his gaze shifting between Madison's frozen smile and my awkward stance. "Haley, I'd love to talk more about your current projects. Perhaps you'll join me for a drink inside. The garden sun is a bit much for me these days." As Lawrence guided me toward the house, I could feel the weight of stares following us, particularly from my family members, whose expressions ranged from shocked to suspicious, to, in my father's case, increasingly calculating. For the first time in years, I was the center of attention at a Campbell family gathering, not as the disappointment, the black sheep, or the family embarrassment, but as someone worthy of Lawrence Hartford's respect and attention. The shift was as sudden as it was unexpected, and as we left Madison standing speechless in our wake, I had the distinct feeling that the careful social order of my family was about to be dramatically disrupted. Lawrence and I had barely reached the relative quiet of my parents' sunroom when Madison caught up to us, her heels clicking aggressively across the marble floor. Her composed socialite mask had slipped, revealing the anger beneath. "Haley, I need to speak with you," she said, her voice tight. "Privately." Lawrence raised an eyebrow. "We were just about to discuss potential opportunities at Hartford Media. Perhaps after..." "It will only take a moment." Madison interrupted something she would never dare do under normal circumstances. "Sister stuff." Before I could protest, she had taken my arm in a grip too firm to be casual and was steering me toward our father's study. Once the heavy oak door closed behind us, she rounded on me. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed, careful to keep her voice low despite her obvious fury. "Having a conversation with Lawrence Hartford," I replied evenly. "Is that a problem?" "Don't play innocent. You deliberately hid your connection to William's family until my engagement party so you could make a scene." I stared at her in disbelief. "Madison, I had no idea Lawrence Hartford was William's father until he walked in today. You never mentioned your fiancé's last name was that Hartford." "Of course I did." "No, you didn't. You always just called him William, and even if you had, why would I make the connection? It's not like we've had meaningful conversations about my work or career where his publishing company might have come up." The study door opened before Madison could respond. Our mother swept in elegant, in her pale blue designer dress, but with 2 spots of colour high on her cheeks, a sure sign of agitation for Eleanor Campbell, who prided herself on never showing strong emotion in public. "Would someone care to explain what's happening?" she demanded in the same hushed tone she'd used when scolding us as children, afraid the household staff might overhear. "Why is Lawrence Hartford treating Haley like she's some sort of celebrated artist? Photojournalist?" I corrected automatically. Mother's lips thinned. "Whatever you call these hobby projects of yours, why didn't you tell us you knew the Hartfords? Do you have any idea how this looks? We've spent months cultivating this relationship for Madison's sake, and now it appears we've been hiding your connection to them." "I wasn't hiding anything," I said. Frustration building. I didn't know Lawrence Hartford was William's father. And even if I had, why would I mention it? When have any of you ever shown interest in my photography career? "Don't be dramatic, Haley," Mother dismissed. "Of course we support your creative pursuits. But really, if you had achievements significant enough to impress someone like Lawrence Hartford, why keep them to yourself?" "I didn't keep them to myself. I stopped sharing because every time I tried, you changed the subject or compared me unfavorably to Madison. The award Lawrence mentioned, I called to tell you about it when it happened. Dad said he was in a meeting and would call back. He never did. Mother waved this away. Your father is a busy man. I'm sure he meant to return your call. The study door opened again this time, admitting my father, his expression a mixture of confusion and calculation that I recognized from business negotiations. Haley, he said, closing the door firmly behind him. I've just had a most interesting conversation with Lawrence Hartford. He seems to believe you're some kind of award-winning photographer. Photojournalist, I corrected again. And yes, I've won several awards. Why didn't you tell us your work was being published by Hartford Media? He demanded. Do you have any idea what connections like that could mean for the family? And there it was, not pride in my accomplishments, but assessment of how they could be leveraged for the Campbell name. I felt something crack inside me, a dam holding back years of hurt and disappointment. I did tell you, I said, my voice surprisingly steady, 3 years ago when my Veterans series was published. I sent emails with links to the online publication. I even mailed you a copy of the magazine. None of you responded, except with a text from Mum saying, "That's nice, dear, but do be careful around those homeless people. They can be unpredictable." My mother had the grace to look momentarily abashed, but quickly rallied. Well, you can hardly blame us for being concerned. Wandering around with those sorts of people taking pictures, it's hardly the career we envisioned for you. And that's always been the problem, hasn't it? I asked. You never envisioned me having my own career, my own path. It was always about what a Campbell daughter should do, should be, should want. Madison, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke up. Oh, please don't start with the poor, misunderstood artist routine. You've always loved playing the victim, Haley. The truth is, you could have had everything. The connections, the opportunities, the respect. But you chose to reject it all just to be difficult. Is that really what you think, that I chose a harder path with financial struggles and constant uncertainty just to spite you? Why else? Madison shot back. You're smart enough to have succeeded in business or law. You could have had the life I've built, the respect I've earned. Instead, you chose to be the family embarrassment, and now you're trying to steal the spotlight at my engagement party. The phrase hit like a physical blow, not because it was new, but because hearing it directly from Madison's lips confirmed what I'd overheard earlier. It wasn't a momentary frustration or a slip. It was how she truly saw me. Is that what you call me, the family embarrassment? I asked quietly. A flicker of shame crossed Madison's face, quickly replaced by defiance. Well, what would you call someone who rejects every advantage they're born with, who chooses to photograph homeless people instead of making something of themselves, archers, who shows up at family functions looking like they shop at department stores? Madison, our mother admonished, though whether for the sentiment or for stating it so baldly was unclear. It's fine. I said, a strange calm settling over me. At least now it's out in the open. I've spent years trying to earn your respect, your approval, pretending those little digs and dismissive comments didn't hurt. It's actually refreshing to hear you say what you really think. Now, Haley, my father intervened, ever the peacemaker when family discord might spill into public view. Let's not blow this out of proportion. We're all just surprised by this connection to the Hartfords. If you'd been more forthcoming about your achievements, we might have what, Dad? Suddenly found my work valuable because someone important recognized it. That's not how respect works. You either value me and my choices because they're mine and they matter to me, or you don't. The door opened again, and this time it was William who entered, looking uncomfortable, to be interrupting what was clearly a tense family discussion. I'm sorry to intrude, he said, but people are starting to notice the entire Campbell family's absence. Mum sent me to check if everything's all right. No one spoke for a moment, the air thick with unresolved tension. Then my father shifted into his public persona, clapping his hands together once, as if dispelling the awkwardness. Everything's fine, just catching up on some family matters. We'll be right out. William hesitated, looking between Madison's flushed face and my rigid posture. Are you sure I can make excuses if you need more time? That won't be necessary, Madison said, her social mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. We were just finishing up. Before any of us could move toward the door, it opened once more, and Lawrence Hartford stepped in. His imposing presence seemed to fill the room, making my father's large study feel suddenly crowded. I apologize for the interruption, he said, though his tone suggested he wasn't particularly sorry. But I couldn't help overhearing part of your discussion. His gaze settled on Madison. Particularly the part about your sister being the family embarrassment. Yay, Madison blanched. Mr. Hartford, He held up a hand. Please. I've never been one for pretense or social niceties, which is why I've succeeded in business, while so many old money operations have failed. His eyes flicked meaningfully to my father. When I see talent, I recognize it regardless of family name or connections. And your sister, Ms. Campbell, has extraordinary talent. Kikiki, Tonastain. My mother stepped forward, social damage control activating. Lawrence, we are, of course, incredibly proud of Hayley's artistic accomplishments. We simply haven't been as informed about them as we perhaps should have been. Lawrence's expression made it clear he wasn't buying the sudden reversal. Indeed. Well, allow me to inform you then. Hayley's work has been published in 3 of my company's publications. Her veteran series directly influenced federal policy. She's turned down offers from several major news outlets to maintain her artistic integrity, and her images from conflict zones have been exhibited in galleries across the country. Each statement landed like a revelation in the silent room. My family members exchanged glances, processing this information about the daughter and sister they had dismissed for so long. I came in here, Lawrence continued, because I wanted to discuss a new project with Hayley. We're launching a special series on humanitarian crises worldwide, and I believe her unique perspective would be invaluable. It would involve significant travel, substantial creative control, and of course appropriate compensation. Madison made a small choked sound. But the wedding is in 6 months. Hayley needs to be here for fittings, the bridal shower, the bachelorette weekend in the Hamptons. Lawrence raised an eyebrow. I wasn't aware professional opportunities should be scheduled around your wedding festivities, Madison. William winced at his father's bluntness. Dad, maybe this isn't the best time to... On the contrary, Lawrence interrupted. It seems like exactly the right time to clear the air. I value authenticity and directness in both business and personal relationships. And what I'm witnessing here gives me pause about the family my son is preparing to join. The statement hung in the air like a thunderclap. My father stepped forward, alarm evident in his expression. Now, Lawrence, I think there's been a misunderstanding. We've always supported Hayley's pursuits, encouraged her independence. Every family has their little disagreements, but the Campbells stand together. Lawrence looked unconvinced. Do they? Because what I heard suggests otherwise. I heard a young woman being belittled for pursuing meaningful work rather than following a prescribed path. I heard her accomplishments being dismissed until they might prove useful to the family reputation. Madison, panicking now as her perfect engagement began to unravel, turned on me. See what you've done. You couldn't stand that for once. Something was about me instead of you. You had to ruin it, like you ruined everything. Madison, William looked shocked at his fiancé's outburst. I didn't do anything, I said quietly. I came to support you despite knowing how you and our parents feel about me. I didn't ask Lawrence Hartford to recognize my work or offer me an opportunity. But you'll take it, won't you? Madison snapped. You'll accept his offer and swan off to some war zone or refugee camp, and everyone will think it's so noble and artistic, while I'm left looking like the shallow one just because I chose a normal, successful life. The raw jealousy in her voice stunned me. All these years I'd assumed Madison pitied me, looked down on me. It had never occurred to me that she might envy the very independence she criticized. Lawrence cleared his throat. I think this is a conversation for the Campbell family to continue privately. William, shall we give them some space? William nodded, looking troubled as he followed his father out. At the door, Lawrence paused and turned back to me. Hayley, the offer stands. Take some time to consider it, but know that talent like yours shouldn't be diminished or hidden to make others more comfortable with their own choices. As the door closed behind them, leaving the 4 of us alone again, the weight of what had just happened settled over the room. My father was the first to break the silence. Well, that was unfortunate timing, he said, as if we'd experienced nothing more than a minor social faux pas. Hayley, I hope you realize how this looks. How what looks, I asked, incredulous. Creating this scene at your sister's engagement party. If you had issues with how we've treated your career choices, there are more appropriate times to address them. I stared at him, unable to believe he was still missing the point. I didn't create a scene. I was standing quietly by myself when Lawrence Hartford recognized me from my professional work that you've consistently dismissed or ignored. If anyone created a scene, it was Madison when she called me the family embarrassment, loudly enough for others to overhear. Don't twist my words, Madison said, though her usual confidence had wavered. I was just expressing frustration to Patricia about your constant need to be different. No, you were belittling me to your future mother-in-law, someone you barely know, to make yourself look better by comparison, just like you've been doing our entire adult lives. My mother stepped between us, ever the mediator, when family disputes threatened to become publicly visible. Girls, please, this is not the time or place for this discussion. We have guests waiting, including William's parents. We need to present a united front. A united front, I repeated. That's all that matters to you, isn't it? How things appear, what people think of the Campbell family, not how we actually treat each other behind closed doors. Don't be naive, Hayley, my father said dismissively. Of course appearances matter. They're the foundation of reputation, and reputation is the foundation of success. And that right there is why we'll never understand each other, I said, a weight lifting as I finally accepted this fundamental truth. Because I measure success by the impact of my work, by whether I've been true to my values, by whether I can look at myself in the mirror each morning and respect the person looking back. I moved toward the door, suddenly desperate for fresh air, for distance from the stifling expectations that had defined my relationship with my family for so long. Where are you going? My mother asked, alarm in her voice. You can't just leave in the middle of this discussion. What about the party? I think I've had enough celebrating for one day, I replied. Congratulations on your engagement, Madison. I truly hope you find happiness with William. So that's it? Madison demanded, anger mixing with what might have been hurt in her expression. You drop this bomb in the middle of my engagement party and then just leave, typical Hayley, always thinking only of yourself. I paused with my hand on the doorknob. I didn't drop any bombs. Lawrence Hartford did that by simply acknowledging my work. All I did was exist in the same space as your future father-in-law while being someone other than who you and our parents wanted me to be. If that's enough to ruin your special day, maybe the problem isn't with me after all. With that, I opened the door and stepped back into the hallway, nearly colliding with William, who was standing just outside, his expression troubled. Oh, I said, startled. I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were there. I was just coming to check if everything was okay, he said, though his awkward stance suggested he might have been listening. Are you leaving? I think it's for the best, I replied. It's been a complicated afternoon. William glanced toward the closed study door, then back at me. Could we talk for a moment before you go? There's a quiet corner in the library. Curious despite my emotional exhaustion, I followed him to my father's library, a room filled with leather-bound classics that looked impressive but were rarely read. William closed the door behind us, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair in a gesture that suddenly made him seem more human than the polished future Hartford heir I'd met earlier. I want to apologize, he said, surprising me, for not knowing about your work, for whatever Madison may have said. I had no idea there was this tension in your family. It's not your fault, I said. Madison and I have a complicated relationship. We always have. Still, I should have made more of an effort to get to know you before now. Madison always made it sound like you were somewhat estranged from the family by choice, that you preferred to keep your distance. I smiled sadly. That's one interpretation. Another might be that it's hard to keep showing up in spaces where you're constantly made to feel inadequate. William nodded slowly. I'm beginning to see that. He paused, seeming to debate whether to continue. The thing is, I'm seeing a side of Madison today that I'm not entirely comfortable with. The way she spoke about you, the jealousy when my father showed interest in your work. It's making me question things. All families have their issues, I said, diplomatically uncomfortable with the direction this conversation was taking. Don't judge your relationship with Madison based on one difficult day. It's not just today, he admitted. There have been other moments. How she treats service staff when she thinks I'm not paying attention, comments about friends who aren't from the right social circles, her obsession with appearances. I've been ignoring these warning signs because on paper, we make perfect sense together. William, I don't think I'm the right person to discuss this with, I said gently. Whatever issues Madison and I have, she's still my sister, and you're still her fiancé. He nodded, looking embarrassed. You're right, of course. I apologize. It's just seeing how quickly she turned on you, hearing her call you the family embarrassment, when your work is clearly so meaningful and impactful, it's given me a lot to think about. That's understandable, but those are thoughts you should probably share with Madison, not with me. You're right, he agreed, straightening his shoulders as if preparing to face something difficult. Thank you for your honesty, Hayley. I hope you'll consider my father's offer. He doesn't extend opportunities like that lightly. As William left the library, presumably to rejoin the party, I leaned against my father's mahogany desk and took a deep breath. The events of the afternoon had left me emotionally drained, but also strangely liberated. For years, I'd been carrying the weight of my family's disappointment, trying to make myself smaller, less visible, less troublesome. Now, unexpectedly, Lawrence Hartford had held up a mirror that reflected a very different image. Not the family embarrassment, but a talented professional whose work had real impact. And while part of me still craved my family's approval, another part was beginning to accept that it might never come, and that perhaps that was okay. I decided to slip out quietly rather than navigate more uncomfortable conversations with party guests, who had undoubtedly picked up on the family tension. As I made my way toward the front entrance, I heard raised voices coming from one of the side parlors. Madison and William apparently continuing the conversation he had started with me. "I can't believe you're taking her side," Madison's voice carried despite her attempt to keep it low. "She's always been difficult, always had to be different just to get attention." "This isn't about taking sides," William replied, his tone more firm than I'd heard before. "It's about how quickly you turned on your own sister, how easily you called her an embarrassment to people who barely know her. You don't understand our family dynamic. Haley has always created award-winning work that influences policy and gives voice to marginalized communities," William interrupted. "Yes, how embarrassing for you all." I hurried past, not wanting to eavesdrop on what was clearly a private argument. But as I retrieved my car from the valet and drove away from my parents' estate, I couldn't help wondering if the damage done today extended beyond my always strained relationship with my family. Had I inadvertently disrupted Madison's engagement as well? The thought should have filled me with guilt. Instead, I felt a strange sense of clarity, as if the afternoon's events had burned away a fog I'd been living in for years. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was driving away from a Campbell family function, not with a sense of failure, but with a glimpse of possibility. The weeks following Madison's engagement party unfolded in unexpected ways. I had anticipated angry phone calls from my parents, accusations about ruining Madison's special day, perhaps even an ultimatum about future family events. Instead, there was silence. No calls, no texts, not even the terse emails my mother usually sent with information about upcoming family obligations. It was as if I had finally done what they had long expected, fully separated myself from the Campbell name and all it represented. The irony, of course, was that I had done so not by failing as they had always feared, but by succeeding in ways they had never valued. 2 days after the party, I received a formal email from Lawrence Hartford's executive assistant, with details about the humanitarian crisis documentation project he had mentioned. The opportunity was even more significant than I had realized. A year-long global assignment covering refugee crises across 3 continents, with my work to be featured in a special edition book, a touring gallery exhibition, and across Hartford Media's digital platforms. The compensation offered was more than I had earned in the past 3 years combined. For someone who had been picking up barista shifts to make rent, it was life-changing. I spent a week researching the regions I would be visiting, considering the ethical implications of the project, and ensuring I could do justice to the stories I would be documenting. In the midst of this professional whirlwind, I received an unexpected text from William. "Can we meet for coffee? Need to talk about some things. No pressure if uncomfortable." Curiosity won out over caution, and I agreed to meet him at a small cafe halfway between my apartment and the financial district where he worked. When I arrived, he was already seated at a corner table looking less polished than he had at the engagement party. His tie loosened dark circles under his eyes, suggesting sleepless nights. "Thanks for coming, Sim," he said as I sat down across from him. "I wasn't sure you would. Honestly, I wasn't sure I should," I replied. "But I'm here now. What's going on, William?" He rotated his coffee mug slowly between his palms. "Madison and I are taking some time apart." Though not entirely surprised given what I'd overheard at the party, I still felt a twinge of guilt. "Because of what happened?" "Not exactly, or not only because of that," he sighed, running a hand through his hair. "The engagement party just brought some issues into focus that I'd been ignoring. How Madison treats people she considers beneath her. How quickly she can turn on someone she claims to care about. How different we are in what we value." "I'm sorry," I said, and meant it. Family dynamics are complicated, but that doesn't mean Madison can't be a loving partner. What happened between us has a long history. William nodded. "I understand that. But seeing how she spoke about you, how your parents dismissed your very real accomplishments until my father pointed them out, it made me question what kind of family I'd be joining, and what kind of family we might create together someday." I shifted uncomfortably. William, I appreciate your candor, but I'm not sure I'm the right person for this conversation. Whatever my issues with Madison, she's still my sister. I know, and I'm not asking you to take sides or say anything against her. He hesitated. I guess I wanted someone in the Campbell orbit to understand why I needed this break. Madison is telling everyone I'm just having pre-wedding jitters, that I'll come around. Your parents have called my father twice to clear up any misunderstandings. That sounds like them, I said wryly. The Campbell approach to problem solving: deny, minimize, and if all else fails, leverage connections to smooth things over. William's lips quirked in a sad smile. Exactly. And that's what I'm trying to figure out. If those are just quirks I need to accept or fundamental values that will eventually tear us apart. I can't answer that for you, I said gently. But I think the fact that you're asking the question means you already know it matters. We talked for another hour. Not about Madison specifically, but about growing up with certain expectations, about the challenge of forging your own path, when a clear one has already been laid out for you, about the difference between a family united by love and one united by obligation. Despite our very different backgrounds, I found William thoughtful and surprisingly self-aware. I've accepted the project with your father, I told him as our conversation wound down. I leave for Jordan next month. He'll be pleased, William said. He doesn't offer opportunities like that lightly. And for what it's worth, I looked up your work after the party. It's extraordinary, Hayley. You have every right to be proud of what you've accomplished. Thank you, I said, the simple acknowledgement meaning more than it should have. Whatever happens with you and Madison, I hope you find clarity. As I left the cafe, I reflected on how strange life could be. How the sister who had called me the family embarrassment had inadvertently connected me with an opportunity that might define my career, and how her fiancé, a man I had expected to have nothing in common with, had shown me more respect in a single conversation than my family had in years. 3 days later, my phone rang with my father's number. The first direct contact from any family member since the party. I hesitated before answering, bracing myself for recriminations or demands to fix whatever I had supposedly broken. Hayley, he said when I finally picked up his voice lacking its usual authoritative tone. Do you have some time to meet? Is everything okay? I asked immediately, concerned despite everything. They were still my family after all. Yes, no one's ill or anything like that. There are some things I'd like to discuss with you, in person. We arranged to meet at a small cafe near his office the following day. I arrived early, nervous, in a way I hadn't been for a business meeting or even when facing Lawrence Hartford's job offer. My father showed up precisely on time, as he always did, punctuality being another Campbell virtue he had instilled in us from childhood. Thank you for meeting me, he said as he settled into the chair across from me, looking oddly uncomfortable without his usual boardroom confidence. Of course, I replied. What's going on, Dad? He took a deep breath, his fingers tapping an anxious rhythm on the table. I've been doing some thinking since Madison's engagement party. About you, about your work, about how we've treated you over the years. I stayed silent, too surprised by this opening to formulate a response. After you left the party, Lawrence Hartford and I had a rather direct conversation, he continued. He made some observations about our family dynamic that were difficult to hear, but not entirely inaccurate. Dad, you don't need to. Please let me finish. This isn't easy for me. He cleared his throat. Lawrence asked if I had ever actually looked at your work. Not just heard that you take photographs, but really looked at what you've created, what you've accomplished. And I had to admit that I hadn't. Not really. He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder, opening it to reveal printouts of my photography. Images from the Veteran series, the Food Desert Project, and others I had worked on over the years. So I did. He said, his voice softening as he looked at the images. I spent an entire weekend researching your career, finding your publications, reading interviews you've given. And Hayley, I owe you an apology, a profound one. I blinked rapidly, fighting sudden tears. Dad? No, please. I need to say this. He met my eyes directly. I've spent years dismissing your choices because they didn't align with what I thought a Campbell should do or be. I measured success by metrics that made sense to me. Financial achievement, social standing, following established paths. But looking at your work, seeing the impact you've had, I was wrong. The simple admission, I was wrong, was something I had never heard from my father before. Richard Campbell built his identity around being right, around making decisions, others followed around knowing the best course of action in any situation. Your photographs tell stories that matter, he continued. They shine light on people and issues that most of us in our privileged bubble never have to see or think about. They've influenced policy, created awareness, made real change in the world. And instead of recognizing that achievement, I treated it as a phase you needed to outgrow. I swallowed hard, trying to process this unexpected validation. Thank you for saying that. It means a lot to hear you acknowledge my work. I should have acknowledged it years ago. He sighed heavily. The truth is, I didn't understand it, so I dismissed it. That was my failure, not yours. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of years of misunderstanding between us, shifting, not disappeared, but perhaps beginning to lighten. How are things with Madison? I finally asked. William mentioned they're taking some time apart. My father grimaced. Yes, that's complicated. Madison is struggling with it. She's convinced he'll come back once he's had time to think that the Hartford merger is too valuable for his family to pass up. And what do you think? I think... He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I think your sister has spent so long being exactly what your mother and I raised her to be that she doesn't know who she is without those expectations. And I'm beginning to wonder if that's our failure too. It was the most insightful thing I'd ever heard my father say about either of his daughters. Have you told her that... I've tried. She doesn't want to hear it right now. She's focused on getting William back, on salvaging the engagement. Your mother is in full damage control mode, reaching out to her society friends to ensure the misunderstanding doesn't become gossip. That sounded like the Campbell way of handling problems. Focus on appearances, on maintaining the facade of perfection, regardless of what might be crumbling behind it. And you? I asked. What are you focused on? My father looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Trying not to make the same mistakes again. Starting by actually seeing my daughters for who they are, not who I wanted them to be. He gestured to the folder of my photographs. I'm proud of you, Hayley. I should have said that years ago, and I'm sorry that it took Lawrence Hartford pointing out your success for me to recognize it. That's a regret I'll have to live with. The words I had waited so long to hear. I'm proud of you. Landed with a complex mix of emotions. Joy at finally receiving this validation, sadness for the years spent without it, wariness about whether this change of heart would last. I've accepted a year-long assignment with Hartford Media, I told him. Documenting refugee crises across multiple countries. I leave next month. Instead of the dismissal or concern I might have expected in the past, my father nodded. Lawrence mentioned the project. It sounds important and challenging. Will you... He hesitated. Will you share your work with me as it progresses? I'd like to follow what you're doing to understand it better. I'd like that, I said, surprised by how much I meant it despite everything. As we parted ways outside the cafe, my father did something he hadn't done in years. He hugged me awkwardly but sincerely. Be safe out there, he said, and know that whatever happens with Madison and William, whatever tensions remain in the family, you are not an embarrassment, Hayley. You never were. I drove home with tears blurring my vision, not entirely sure what had just happened or what it meant for my relationship with my family going forward. But for the first time in as long as I could remember, I felt a tentative hope that maybe, just maybe, being different from what was expected didn't have to mean being estranged. The months that followed brought changes I never could have anticipated. I spent weeks preparing for my international assignment, getting vaccinations, researching the regions I'd be visiting, securing necessary permits and credentials, and learning essential phrases in several languages. The work gave me purpose and focus during a time when my personal life felt increasingly uncertain. Madison and William's relationship remained in limbo, neither officially ended nor fully reconciled. According to my father, who had begun calling me weekly in an unexpected but welcome development, Madison was still convinced she could salvage the engagement with the right strategy. My mother remained firmly in her corner, arranging strategic social encounters and damage control with their shared circle. A week before my departure for Jordan, I received an unexpected text from Madison. Can we talk, please? After deliberating for a day, I agreed to meet her at a neutral location. A small park near the downtown area, public enough to discourage dramatics, but private enough for an honest conversation. She was waiting on a bench when I arrived, looking both like and unlike the Madison I knew. The designer clothes and perfect makeup were still in place, but there was a vulnerability to her posture, a lack of the usual confidence that defined her. Thanks for coming, she said, as I sat beside her, leaving careful space between us. I wasn't sure you would. We're still sisters, I replied simply. Madison nodded, twisting her hands in her lap, a nervous gesture I hadn't seen since we were children. I've been doing a lot of thinking since the engagement party, about us, about how I've treated you over the years. I waited, letting her find her words without interruption. I was awful to you, she finally continued. Calling you the family embarrassment, undermining your work, treating you like you were somehow less because you chose a different path. I'm not proud of that. Thank you for acknowledging it, I said carefully. The thing is, she continued, her voice catching slightly, I think part of me was jealous. You had the courage to walk away from the Campbell expectations to choose your own path even when it was harder. I never did. I just followed the blueprint Mum and Dad laid out. The right schools, the right career, the right social circles, the right fiancé. You seemed happy with those choices, I observed. I thought I was. Or maybe I just never questioned them enough to know if I was happy or just compliant. She looked at me directly for the first time. When William said he needed space to reconsider our engagement, it was like the foundation of everything I'd built my identity on started cracking. If I wasn't the perfect Campbell daughter with the perfect life, who was I? The raw honesty in her question caught me off guard. That's a pretty profound thing to be wrestling with. Turns out, having your fiancé question your character because of how you treat your sister leads to some serious self-reflection, she said with a bitter laugh. I've been seeing a therapist. Don't tell Mom. She'd have a conniption at the idea of a Campbell needing therapy. Your secret's safe with me, I assured her, finding myself smiling despite the gravity of the conversation. Is it helping? It's uncomfortable, but necessary, I think. Madison smoothed an invisible wrinkle from her skirt. I've spent so long performing the role of Madison Campbell perfect daughter that I'm not sure who I am without the performance. That's pretty pathetic, isn't it? Not pathetic, I said gently. Human. We all absorb messages about who we should be, what success looks like. You internalized one set of messages, I rejected them and found others. Neither path is inherently better or worse. That's very generous of you, considering how I've treated you. I shrugged. We're both products of the same family system, just responding to it differently. Madison looked out across the park, watching a group of children playing on the swings. I think I've lost William for good. He says he needs someone who shares his values, who measures success by impact rather than appearances. Someone more like... She glanced at me. Well, more like you, honestly. I'm sorry, I said and meant it. For what it's worth, I never intended to come between you two. I know that now, and it's not your fault. It's mine. The engagement party just brought to the surface issues that were already there. She paused. Dad says you're leaving for Jordan soon. Next week. It's a year-long assignment, though I'll be moving between several countries. Madison nodded, something like respect flashing in her eyes. That's pretty amazing, Hayley. I know I haven't said it before, but your work is important. Meaningful in ways my corporate law career never will be. Different doesn't mean less valuable, I said. Your work matters too, just in different ways. Maybe, though defending wealthy corporations from their own mistakes doesn't feel particularly noble these days. She smiled sadly. I've been looking at your photographs online. They're powerful. I can see why Lawrence Hartford is so impressed with your work. We talked for another hour more honestly than we had in years, perhaps ever. There were no magical solutions, no instant healing of the rift that had grown between us since childhood. But there was a beginning, a tentative bridge across the chasm of misunderstanding and resentment that had defined our relationship for so long. As we prepared to part ways, Madison surprised me with a genuine hug. Be careful out there, okay? And maybe send me some of your work. Occasionally, I'd like to actually see what my sister is accomplishing. I will. I promised, returning the embrace. 3 days before my departure, I decided to organize a small exhibition of my work, partly as a farewell gathering for the few close friends who had supported my photography journey over the years, but also as a final opportunity to share my vision with anyone who cared to see it. I rented a small gallery space in a converted warehouse, hung a carefully curated selection of my images, and sent out invitations without much expectation about who would attend. My father had promised to come, but I knew my mother was still processing the upheaval in the family dynamics and likely wouldn't appear. The evening of the exhibition arrived with the nervous energy that always accompanies sharing one's work publicly. My closest friends arrived early, helping with last-minute arrangements and providing moral support. Lawrence Hartford made an appearance, moving thoughtfully from image to image, occasionally asking me questions about technique or the stories behind specific photographs. An hour into the event, I was explaining the context of an image from my food desert series to a small group when I looked up to see my father entering the gallery. Beside him, to my complete shock, was my mother looking uncomfortable but determined. They made their way through the space, slowly stopping before each photograph, my father occasionally leaning close to explain something to my mother. When they finally reached me, the conversation around us quieted, friends tactfully drifting away to give us privacy. "Your work is extraordinary, Hayley," my father said simply. "Thank you for inviting us." "Gisi an istance." My mother's expression was more complex, a mixture of discomfort, surprise, and what might have been the beginnings of understanding. "These are not what I expected," she admitted, gesturing to the images surrounding us. "They're beautiful in their way, powerful." Coming from Eleanor Campbell, this qualified praise was tantamount to a standing ovation. "Thank you for coming," I said, meaning it, despite the lingering hurt and distance between us. "It means a lot that you're both here. We should have been at all your exhibitions," my father said, regret evident in his voice. "I'm sorry we weren't." My mother didn't echo the apology explicitly, but she reached out and squeezed my hand briefly, a rare physical gesture from a woman who had always maintained careful composure. "Be safe on your travels," she said. "Your father says you'll be in some dangerous areas." "I'll be careful," I promised, touched by the concern, even if it came wrapped in her characteristic worry about risk. "Is Madison coming, sir?" my father asked, glancing toward the entrance. "I don't know," I admitted. I invited her, but she didn't confirm either way. My mother's lips tightened slightly at the mention of Madison, who was still struggling with the apparent permanent end of her engagement. William had officially called it off 2 weeks earlier, setting off another crisis in the Campbell household that my mother was working overtime to minimize socially. "She's having a difficult time," my mother said, as if feeling the need to explain Madison's potential absence. "This situation with William has been challenging for her." "I understand," I said, not wanting to reopen painful topics on what had otherwise been a positive evening. "She and I have talked. We're working on things." The exhibition continued a quiet success by the standards that mattered to me. Lawrence Hartford introduced me to several influential people in the publishing world who expressed interest in my work. My friends celebrated with genuine enthusiasm. My parents stayed for an hour, my father engaged and interested my mother, making a visible effort to understand this part of my life she had so long dismissed. Madison never appeared but late that night, after the exhibition had ended and I was home packing for my upcoming journey. My phone buzzed with a text from her. "I'm sorry I couldn't come tonight. Still working through some things. But I'm proud of you, sis. Safe travels." 6 simple words. "But I'm proud of you, sis." From the sister who had once called me the family embarrassment. Not a complete healing, not a perfect resolution, but a start. As I finished packing for the journey that would take me thousands of miles from Boston and the complicated family dynamics I was born into, I reflected on how unexpectedly life had unfolded. My sister's engagement party, meant to be a celebration of her perfect Campbell life, had instead become a catalyst for long overdue changes in our family system. Madison was facing the challenge of redefining herself outside the narrow confines of expectation. My parents were beginning to see value in paths they had previously dismissed, and I was stepping into the most significant professional opportunity of my career, finally recognized, not despite my differences, but because of them. The journey ahead would be challenging in ways I could only begin to imagine. Documenting human suffering requires both technical skill and profound empathy. It demands bearing witness to trauma while maintaining enough professional distance to tell the stories effectively. But for perhaps the first time, I would be embarking on this work with a sense that my voice mattered, that my perspective was valuable, not just to strangers who viewed my photographs, but to the family whose approval I had unconsciously sought for so long. Being called the family embarrassment had hurt more deeply than I had allowed myself to acknowledge. But in the end, it was that very label, and the moment it was spoken aloud at Madison's engagement party, that had created space for authenticity, for growth, for the beginning of healing. As I zipped my final suitcase, I smiled at the irony. Sometimes the labels meant to diminish us become the very things that set us free. Have you ever been unfairly labeled by your family or felt like an outsider in your own home? Share your experience in the comments below. I'd love to know how you found your own path and what helped you stay true to yourself despite family pressure. Don't forget to like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about finding strength in difficult situations, and share with someone who might need to hear that being different isn't the same as being wrong. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, Sometimes the people who don't understand your journey are not meant to be part of your destination.